she's looking at me, waiting for me to connect with her like a human, when I felt like a robot. In this moment, I felt like I've never let anyone down more in my entire life. She's like, Christina, what's happening? What's going on? It was watching the trust that I had built with her completely erode in 1 minute.
Welcome to the Revenue Vault, the show where I go inside the minds of sales leaders who build unstoppable revenue engines. Hey, I'm Marcus Chan, CEO of Bentley Consulting, creator of the Revenue Engine OS, and sales leader turned systems geek. Every week, I talk with CROs, VPs, and go-to-market pros who aren't just hitting quota, they're engineering performance at scale. We cut out the fluff and unpack real strategies that drive pipeline velocity and power. If you're here to learn how the best build, scale, and win, you're in the right room. Today's guest is Christina Brady, CEO of Luster AI and former tech exec who's running 140-person sales orgs over at Glassdoor, Groupon, and one of the sharpest voices in sales leadership today. In this episode, she shares the exact moment she went rogue against HR during a brutal round of layoffs, how it completely rewired how she leads. We dig into how bad managers create trauma, why scripted reps are a lazy crutch, and the high-risk mistakes most leaders make in their one-on-ones. Plus, how improv, introversion, and not fitting the tech mold became her leadership superpower. Let's dive in. Well, Christina, I tell you what, I'm pumped because your background is freaking killer. Aside from obviously being the CEO of Luster AI, which is incredible, before this, obviously you crushed it selling directly, but you also got promoted very rapidly over at Groupon. You were running big teams across the board at Glassdoor. You were head of growth. You were SVP over at Speakit. You ran a lot of big orgs. So I got to imagine, throughout all the time in your leadership career, what was probably the worst day you ever had as a sales leader?
Oh, God. Honestly, there was multiple, and it was always when there was a reduction in force. Yeah. And I hate to even speak that, but for me, my passion is seeing people excel in their roles. I have this idea that life is so fragile and we don't know how much time we have, and we spend so much time at work. And as much as we say, keep work and your personal life separate, your work isn't your identity, it's so hard not to conflate the two. And as a sales leader, when I'm hiring my people and I'm spending time up leveling them and I'm believing in them, when there's a reduction in force, especially when it's just a business decision that has to be made and people's lives are impacted, the fear that they feel, the disappointment that they feel, the imposter syndrome that they feel, the looking inward that they feel, the life shakeup. For a lot of people, being laid off creates an element of trauma that they then carry with them for the rest of their lives. And especially if you're a sales leader, which I've been included in reduction in forces, I've also survived 5 of them in my career, and every single one of them was the absolute worst day on the job.
You bring up such a good point, right? I don't think enough leaders talk about this. Since you've been through a number of them, and even part of also dealing with some of the news, what have maybe you've done to prepare yourself for that conference? Like, there's so much of a mental game, right? 'Cause I've been a part of that too. It's hard, it's like the buildup of yourself. You almost have to talk yourself into it to make sure it's done in the right way, where you also don't put any risk on the company too. So how have you prepared yourself for that?
There's 2 things that I really, really believe in when you have to have a difficult conversation like that. The first is, it's not about you. Do not use any verbiage, nomenclature, communication that makes the person whose life you're impacting feel like they have to apologize to you. Right? So that's like, it had nothing to do with you. This is such a hard day for me. I wish that I could do more. Like, making the person who's being impacted be like, oh, I'm sorry for you, or it's not your fault. Like, it is not about them letting you off the hook, one. So you take whatever they're going to have at you, and it is not about you or your feelings. So telling them, I'm sorry, it's not you, it's us. Like, none of that is helpful. Telling them, like, here's what I'm going to do to help you, and here's why it's going to be okay. None of that is helpful in that moment when they're getting that information. So if you're going to do anything that's going to make them feel like they have to apologize to you or let you off the hook or let you feel better, pause on that and practice first. The next piece of it is, I don't believe in making people sit through a monologue where they're wondering what you're about to tell them and then telling them. So whenever I've had to let somebody go or it's a reduction in force, I don't care what talk track and what order my HR team gives to me. I'll hit all the points, but first and foremost, when they sit down in front of me, I say, this was a last minute addition on your calendar. Today's your last day at the company. I'm going to give you a minute, and then I'm going to go into why and what happened. Because the other way around, where it's like, so over the course of the last couple of months, we've done this and you've done that and we've gotten here, and and the whole time you see them sitting there and going, am I getting fired? Am I getting promoted? What's happening? And then they're missing all the context, and creating that anxiety is cruel. So I say, out of the gate, this is your last day. Take a second. I know. Now we're going to go into why. And you can react any way that you need to react. This is a completely safe space. This is awful. This feels awful. I'm going to get through the why. And then we're going to make sure that you have the time that you need for any statement you have to make, any questions you want to ask. We want to treat you with care. Because that's the least that you can do for people, is practice.
You know, I love so much about that. And I think you and I are so aligned, where sometimes we beat around the bush too much. Because in their mind, they're like, get to the point.
Like, what is this?
Like, they already think it's probably going to happen anyways. Like, just give it to them straight. Be a pro about it, right? And like, do your best to remove some of that emotion from it, where, you know, you're not just like over coddling them. It's almost like the old school sandwich method of giving feedback. It's like, no, like, it's like you're it doesn't make you feel any better at all. Like, they're still walking away without a job. They have to worry about the future now. Like, they're worried about Cobra and all that stuff now. Like, how can you just get right to the point? I think that's really, really powerful. I love that methodology, right? That framework you do. How did you come up with that? Did that happen to you? Is that how you figure out over time this is like the best way to get that type of feedback?
The first reduction in force that I ever had to do was the first time that I had to fire somebody. I was really young. I was 24. And I remember that HR basically gave us all a readout, and they were like, you're going to get in the room, because we were all in person. This was like, we were in the office, and they were like, you're going to get in the room and you're going to read this paper. And at the end of reading the paper, you're going to get up and you're going to leave, and then HR is going to take over. And I'm like, okay, got it, right? And then there was the list of the people who were in my org. And at the time, I had like 38 people that rolled up to me. It was wild. And there were like 10 of them that day that I had to cut. It was horrible. It was horrible. And these are all people that, again, that I was invested in. One of the reasons I loved going into leadership is I'm so invested in my people. I learn everything I can about them. I care about them very, very deeply. And these 10 people were people that were no exception to that. So I said, okay. And the very first gal that came in, she had made so much improvement over the course of the year. She cared so much, and she just wasn't there yet. She needed time. And she sits down, and she was not expecting it. And that was the first leadership failure that I realized, was like, nobody should ever get in a room and be caught off guard that they're being fired, if you can help it, right? Sometimes in a reduction in force, they can't really help it. But she's sitting down thinking like, hey, extra meeting, what's going on? You know, so I first saw the positivity. And then I had the paper in front of me, and I took on this very somber tone because I felt somber, and I read it. And it was a lot of that, like giving all the context first. And then at the very end was to summarize, today is your last day at the organization. HR is going to take over to answer any questions. We thank you for the time that you've spent here so far, and we apologize that this is the way that it ended. And as I'm reading it, I'm looking up at her, and I'm watching her demeanor go from this happy demeanor to a little bit more calm, to panic hits her face. And she's looking around, and she's looking at me, waiting for me to connect with her like a human, like I always have. And I felt like a robot. And and in this moment, I felt like I've never let anyone down more in my entire life. And showing up in that meeting as a robot, reading something pre-written, she's looking at me to be like, Christina, what's happening? What's going on? It was watching the trust that I had built with her completely erode in 1 minute. And I get halfway through and I start shaking, and then I started crying. And then she's kind of like, why are you, and then she's feeling bad for me. And I was like, no, you should. And HR is like, you got to keep reading. I was like, I'm sorry. I'm like wiping my, and like horrible for her. And it was that feeling of like that and I was like, I walked out of the room, and I went in the bathroom, and I just was sobbing. And I came back to HR, and they were like, for the next one. And I was like, I'm not doing that again. I was like, you can fire me. Like 24, my frontal lobe's not fully developed. I was like, you can fire me. I am not doing that. I was like, I am not doing that again. I was like, I didn't feel like a human. I let her down. I betrayed her trust. I was like, I get that we have to do this. I'm not doing it like this. I was like, can I reverse the order? And she's like, we really need you to just follow. And I was like, then fire me. Like I literally went rogue. I was like, then fire me. I was like, or you do it. I'm not doing this again. And it was that moment where I was like, there's a better way to treat people than what we are doing.
I think it's really powerful, right? Because we all get the HR script that they give you, the long monologue that you like. It's terrible, right? It's very cookie cutter. It makes them feel like they're a number now, right? It's just like it's pretty garbage. And I love that you challenged and you flipped it on a script. And I think you made something really key, which is in some situations, yes, when you're rolling on a riff, it's like it's uncontrollable. Where it's like they might be doing pretty well actually. It's just unfortunately business can't sustain it. It is what it is.
Right.
But then there's the other piece where they're that person who, they've been improving, like the gal you mentioned, right? And then they're like surprised. Did that shift how you maybe approach performance management earlier on?
Yeah.
Like what did you end up doing as a result of that?
100%. Like one of the things first is that I think every leader or every human should practice difficult conversations, right? It's one of the reasons that I founded a company that I did that's very much rooted in practice, is like practice tough conversations first because you're impacting somebody else. But I realized in that first riff, like that first reduction in force that I went through changed my leadership, changed everything. Yeah. And I was like, people being caught off guard by being let go is such a leadership failure. And where does that come from? It comes from not deploying concepts like radical candor, where I'm afraid to give you feedback because I don't want to impact my relationship with you. I don't want to be mean. I don't want to get into a combative conversation. It comes from weak leadership that doesn't have the communication skills to be able to challenge you directly because you're caring personally. And so we do like what you said, the crud sandwich. Like someone sits down and their performance is failing, and if you don't help correct their behavior, they're going to get fired, but you're still in the moment where you can impact that. And instead of saying, hey, we got to have a difficult conversation around this performance. We're going to get it better, but here's what's wrong. And if this doesn't fix, this is where this is going to go. So we got to get this better together. Are you in or are you out? Instead, we go, your hair looks great today. Your work sucks. And I love your shoes. And they're like, well, so my hair, like, what about my work and and so we were like, you're an amazing asset to this organization and you're great culturally and you're so helpful and you're not really hitting your number. And that's a huge problem, but like, you're going to get there. And we soften the message because it's weak, untrained leadership. And that's a failure on behalf of the executive leadership and everybody who was there. And so that was another thing for me, was like, if I ever let somebody go in my career and they're shocked that they're losing their job, and I can help it, right? Reduction in forces aside. Right. If I'm letting someone go for performance and they've been rolling up to my team or my org and I'm letting them go and they're like, what? I did not see this coming. I've failed. I'm a bad leader. That is horrible. Have the guts to have the difficult conversation because you care about your people versus maintain the relationship and then completely erode it when you mess up their livelihood.
Mm-hmm. I think it's super powerful, right? Because I'm all about that proactive leadership, just like you, where we're already addressing before it's a thing. Like we're not waiting until the rankings come out and they're not performing. It's like we can see all the leading indicators leading up to it and we're addressing it up front, right? So this way it's not a surprise. Yeah. One thing I found, maybe you found the same thing, when you went from managing maybe reps directly to managing leaders, right? I found very quickly, overnight, majority of leaders were not having these type of conversations.
No.
So how did you develop your leaders to help learn how to have these tough conversations consistently without breaking trust with their team?
Yeah, that was actually one of the first forays that I had into training on different communication and behavioral and even like personality styles and bringing those soft skills into work. So I've been a trainer for the last 15 years. I've been lucky enough to up-level over 30,000 reps. And the majority of the training that I do is around those soft skills. I do a lot of DISC methodology training. I do a lot of corporate communication. I do a lot of that, like, what is the unspoken word? What is body language telling you? When we communicate differently, what does that look like? How does written communication in a Slack or a text very different than when I'm sitting in front of you? And so that level of training, one, I got deep and geeky in. Like I was like, this is fascinating to me that so much of where we erode relationships and then revenue in a business comes down to really bad communication at multiple levels. And so when I became a leader of other people, first thing that I would do is I would put all of my leaders through training on communication. How do we identify how you communicate? How do you identify how your team communicates? How do you make your people feel heard and valued and validated and understood? How do you have difficult conversations where you're not sure how they're going to react? How do you read their body language to identify if you're making them uncomfortable? And if you don't listen to any of that, at the end of the day as a leader, sometimes you have to withdraw. You have to make a withdrawal. If you are not depositing as much as you are withdrawing, then that's bad and aggressive leadership. If you're consistently only giving people constructive, bad feedback, but you're never telling them what you see that's good, that's also weak leadership. So the pendulum can swing the other way too. But a positive feedback conversation and a constructive feedback conversation need to be separate conversations. And in a lot of cases, the positive feedback conversation can be public and in front of the team. And like, how do I pump you up? The constructive conversation should not be in front of other people, right? So there's all of these different levers that go into it. And I got super passionate about it. And then it became something that I brought down to the leaders who reported to me.
100% agree. And I love that so much because ultimately at the end of the day, I love the words used into positive withdrawal because I've always seen it as trust at the end of the day. And it's like a bank account, right? You got to deposit more than you withdraw, right? If you draw too much, you're not going to have any money in the bank. You'll be in a lot of trouble there, right? Now, I think what's also really interesting is what I have found is a lot of times leaders, generally speaking, they want to do a good job, the frontline leader. They want their team to perform. But a lot of them, you provide them this training, but a lot of them lack the self-awareness of how to actually do it and what they're actually doing. So they'll think, okay, I need to get feedback, right? So yeah, I'm gonna say, hey, good job on doing this. And then they'll also criticize publicly without even realizing it because they think they're helping them, right? How did you help your leaders increase their own self-awareness so they're like, oh, I should not be doing this. This is socially awkward, actually.
Yeah, it's getting ahead of it before it happens. It's knowing that natural human behavior is going to flub in those cases. Not only does that happen in our personal life, right? Like a lot of relationships are diminished in our personal life because of poor communication choices. It's even worse at work because at work you have this really strange sort of barrier between people where it's like, as a leader, what is the right relationship to have with somebody who is my direct report? I can't get too close. I don't want to be too far. Too far, I'm distant. Too close, now it's inappropriate, and now there's favoritism and things like that. And then you're sort of influenced, and it's hard to be objective. If you're a peer of mine, what does the relationship look like? How do I give a peer feedback? I've actually seen leaders struggle more with giving their peer feedback than anything. And where people very naturally go, like what a lot of leaders who have not had proper communication training lean on, is they go, you know what I do? And they think it's brilliant. They're like, in my one-on-one, I sit down and I ask my team to give me feedback. Yeah, I do. And they're like, and that's like, I'm a very new age, and I ask them to give me feedback. And here's the problem with that is they're in a position where no matter what they say, it's a lose-lose. You think that you're being an open leader by like, I'm going to give you feedback. I know, you go ahead, you give me feedback. Here's the thing. You're in charge of their career. You're in charge of their compensation. You're in charge of what's happening on a day-to-day basis. Your opinion of them absolutely matters. And feedback, asking somebody who is untrained in giving feedback, who literally is a subordinate of yours, to then give you feedback when you hold all the power, it's a lose-lose. Because if they actually do give you constructive feedback, and if you don't take that the right way or you disagree with it, now they go, oh my God, I've ruined my relationship with my manager. That's going to impact me personally. If they just tell you everything that you want to hear, like, you're great, you're amazing, you're the best manager I've ever had, well, now you're not getting the feedback that you need. You think you're doing a great job, and you continue to make these mistakes that erode revenue. So don't ask people as a leader to give you feedback. There are mechanisms that you can make safe for your team to give you feedback. But if you're sitting in front of them, no matter what, you have now ruined their day. Because if they say, no, I don't want to give you feedback, or I'm going to give you great feedback, or fine, I'll be constructive, all of those are so high risk. Just don't put them in those positions. And that's it. As a leader, don't put your people in bad positions.
So how do you go about getting that feedback then, right? Like, because that's like, I'm sure some leaders listen like that sounds amazing, and regardless of the level that they're at, they're like, I need to get feedback from my directors, my managers, or my team.
Yeah.
How do they go about getting that feedback so they can increase their self awareness and improve?
Yeah, it's so not revolutionary. There's two main ways you can do it. One is a skip level. If your org is large enough to have a skip level, then you have your leader meet with your team. They keep an anonymous doc. There's structured questions where everyone knows what they are going to be asked. Nobody's names are recorded. The senior leader takes the notes, delivers the notes to the manager, and then they give them feedback based on here's the overall sentiment of the team and relevant to these questions. And then you as the leader who got the feedback, you should then go back to your team and say, these were the themes that I heard from the team. I want to make sure you all know that I heard that. Here's what I'm going to work on. We're going to have another skip level in 3 months where we can check to make sure that I'm showing up for all of you the way that I want to. Okay, so that's way number one is the skip level. Way number two is any kind of anonymous feedback source, right? Like a Google Doc, a Survey Monkey, like an anonymous source where they can submit feedback for their leader. The only way that both of these are really, really difficult is when you have a super small team, right? Like if you've got 1 or 2 reps and you're like, hey, leave me some anonymous feedback, right? That's right. So that's when it's difficult. And this is why, now we're on a whole nother topic. This is why the leadership that you hire at an early organization has to be really sharp. They have to be the kind of self-aware leaders that will identify when they are ineffective and not rely on the 1 or 2 or 3 reps on their team to tell them. So early companies are not the place for first-time sales leaders.
You're so true because, especially in those early stage companies, I mean, they're responsible for so many things on top of that, right? But also they have such a small org. If they're not self-aware and they're getting feedback from only 2 sources, that's not enough data points to make a decision, right?
Right.
I love the point about the skip level piece, and also this even use like a Survey Monkey or Google Forms. Now, I remember when I was running an org, and we had 110 employees across the board. But I would do every quarter. I would do something very similar. I would actually reach out directly and have individual calls with each of the reps.
Love that.
Just to see how things are going. Right? I didn't want to talk about any numbers. I don't want to prepare absolutely nothing. This is not about your numbers. I just want to see how you're doing, how we are doing across the board. Share what you're comfortable with. And then, of course, combine that with also a Survey Monkey survey that we did that does not as well, to provide no personal information. It allows to get a more holistic view of across the board of patterns and trends to do work and manage, to develop and manage, which I absolutely love.
Yeah.
Now, 100%. I think on a different pivot, right? Because you've had such a tremendous career across the board, a lot of different roles. I got to imagine at one point or the other, maybe you felt like a total fraud or like an imposter. Or there's a moment in time that you felt that, but you kept going anyways.
Yeah. I would say the way that my imposter syndrome showed up was less, I don't know what I'm doing, and more, am I the right person for this? Am I too much? If you look at me and you know me, I don't look, especially at the time, like a typical tech executive or tech employee, right? It's hard enough being in a minority group, but I don't come from this MBA background. I come from comedy. Like I literally was a performer at Second City and Improv Olympic for 12 years, right? I come from a family of musicians. I'm tattooed. I wear ridiculous jewelry all the time. Like I was like, am I too much for this? Do I need to tone down? And I have, I'm actually very, very introverted, which would get in my head in all the wrong ways, where I'd be like, hey, I'm not the person that can go to a happy hour and meet and talk to everybody and get out there. So I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be terrible at this job. And then on the flip side, when I am comfortable with people, I have a big personality and I like to have fun and I like to get to know people and so then I can also be really intense. And so it was less like, I don't think I can do this job. And it was more like, is the world going to accept somebody like me doing a thing like this? Are they going to embrace me? And I spent a long time with that level of imposter syndrome of feeling like I had to tone down. I had to be a different version of myself. I had to dress differently. I had to look different. I just had to appear like a toned down corporate version of myself. And over time, that sort of transitioned into, I would say, a little bit of a hybrid, which I think is fine. And now it's like I don't really care as much. I've accepted that, like, I am not everybody's cup of tea. That used to really bother me. It actually doesn't anymore. If I'm not your cup of tea, that's fine. You don't have to drink. Like, it doesn't, like, it's fine, and that's just come with it being like beaten out of me. And then also I'm 18 years into my career now. And so I am who I'm going to be. And for the people who are just starting in their career, who are feeling like I did, I'm doing it for me, but also for them to see that success doesn't look a certain way. And success is not for a certain person. It comes down to your motivation and your behavior and your passion and your acumen and your capability to figure it out. And if you have all of those things, then be you all the way.
I love that as a fellow introvert, right? Who also looked different than a lot of those rooms I walked into.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you almost you have to fall into like a mold just to like get along into, sadly, some of these boys clubs where everyone kind of looked, dressed the same from the same school pedigree, and you're like feeling a little different. So I love that you got to the point where it's the same with me. I'm like, I just don't care. Love me or hate me, it doesn't really matter. This is it.
This is, yep.
Now, what I think is really cool and interesting is your background in terms of like, that comedy piece and just who you are. Like, I have found, generally speaking, people who have really unique backgrounds that appear different on the outside, become like a superpower in a lot of the world without them realizing until maybe later on. Is that something you kind of found with your background?
I don't know that I looked at it like that until I had wonderful people in my life that would say, like, hey, that's actually a kind of a great thing. Every human being goes through hardship. And every human being goes through their ups and their downs. And there's always this element of like, so what? And one of my life mottos is make it mean something. So if you're going to go through something really difficult, if you're going to come from a different background, make that mean something. And so for me, I fell into sales due to extreme life hardship. I did not say, you know what I want to be? I want to be an account executive in tech. This is my dream. Like this, it was like I accidentally found myself there because I was being scrappy and I had to figure it out. And then I uncovered a passion of mine that has carried me through my career. And coming from hardship and a different background and that element of having to figure it out, having to feel like I needed to prove myself, having to be better than the other people in the room because I didn't have the background. So I was like, look, I don't have the same background that you do. I don't look like you do. I don't talk like you do. So I have to be 10 times better. I'm just the kind of freaky person where that like fuels my fire. And so, but that comes from the experience that I had where you're faced with being at the very, very bottom and you can either decide to stay there or go up. And that just changes who you are. And then I'm lucky, coming from a comedy background has served me so well in this industry. I even do corporate improv workshops for sales kickoffs because it's like, look, this is a muscle that will make you better at what you do. So now I found the way to take my background. Like I didn't want to be a tech executive. I literally wanted to be on a sitcom. Like my dream was to like go to LA and like be on a sitcom. I was like, this is what I will do. And now I've like sort of blended the two. I was like, I'm a tech person that makes like weird jokes and I do funny videos on LinkedIn that are like selling products. It's all kind of merged together, which I think is beautiful. And it gives that part of my life the nod that it deserves.
Well, I think it's so powerful. I mean, there's a couple of key points that you mentioned. Right? I think number one, because of your tough adversity, right? It's like you rise up because of it. And I found I was kind of, it's very similar where I kind of fell into it, right? Not wanting to do it. Then I got stuck because it was a recession. I'm like, oh my, I guess I'm a salesperson now. Like,
2008.
It's my thing now, right? Like, I hope I don't go broke, even more broke, So, which I think it's amazing though. It's almost like when you have that chip on your shoulder, right? You don't come from being fed with a silver spoon. You are willing to do what most are not willing to do. And when you have perceived weaknesses, you're like, how can I leverage my own strengths? And I think what I think is very fascinating is your background in comedy and performance, and just as an introvert, it's like you have to learn how to turn it on, right, on the dime. But also, I have found with comedians, they're incredibly smart, generally speaking, where they're able to make connections that most people can't make the connection on.
Yeah.
And that's so powerful for communication, to interacting with people, right? To be able to think on the spot, right? To be able to read the situation, break the ice if it's awkward. There's so many amazing things, and it's like the best comedians are really tremendous communicators. Like you watch a long stand-up with anybody, when you watch the whole thing, you're like, oh my gosh, they put those seeds up front, they looked back, wow, that was like so beautifully done. And that's just communication, right? And that's it helps you in so many ways, which I think is absolutely incredible, right? So, I think what's interesting is when you are leading teams, and maybe you feel like different, right? So you felt a little bit different as part of it, right? Did you ever get teased by your team and you like found out about it? Did that ever happen at any point?
I don't know that I ever got teased by my team, because I was always like, I kind of always 8-miled everybody, or I was like, anything about me, I'm going to call out first. And so then if you're trying to point it out, I'd be like, no, you're totally right. I'm like, I absolutely biffed that. Like I've always had kind of a thick skin for that. Cause again, coming from comedy, I'm like, if there's a laugh and if I happen to be the laugh, like, let's go. I had one moment where there was a comment that was made that I just thought was really, really strange. And this was early in my career. This was, oh my gosh, this was 2012. And I was a leader at a large tech company. If you look at my LinkedIn, you can figure out which one it is. Sure. And we had brought in a trainer. And at the time, there were about 40 frontline sales managers. And there were only 2 or 3 of us that were women, which fine, like but at that time I had decided, so I've always been a redhead. I've always had, and I decided, I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to go platinum blonde. I don't know. Again, I was young and I was like, let's do it. At this point in this training, I happened to have long, like very, very platinum blonde hair. And for some reason, this trainer was talking about, like, as a leader, needing to be taken seriously by your team and by your management. And he dropped this stat. I don't even know if it was true, but he was like, statistically, the people who get and earn the least respect are blonde women. And he said that, and and I was the only blonde woman in the room. Everyone turned and looked at me and they were like, Christina. And I was like, cool. I was like, yeah, I guess it's like, I guess I gotta dye my hair again. I guess this blonde, and I was like, I guess this was a really bad choice. But it was that, like, it was so weird to just have that, like, and then everyone look at me and I'm like, yeah, hey, I was also the most senior leader in the room at the time. So it was just this strange moment where I had never had somebody be like, blonde women get no respect. And I was like, that also was kind of disrespectful. Like I was like, you're doing it right now. It's just so meta.
You're actually making this happen right now.
Yeah, this is so meta. Like Ashton Kutcher is gonna blow through a wall and be like, you're getting punked. So I've had stuff like that. I've had comments like that made to me, but honestly, even then I was just kind of like, that was wild. Like I was like, that was a wild thing to say, So it doesn't really get to me.
Yeah, I think especially you've been in comedy, but also you've been through the ranks. It's like haters are going to hate. It is what it is. Yeah. You're in your seat for a reason, right? It is what it is. So now I think we're going to pivot a little bit, right? So let's talk about like maybe it could be sales leadership or sales practices. What's maybe a best practice that you have heard or seen people talk about that you think is like absolute BS?
Oh my gosh, absolute BS in terms of sales practices. Scripting your salespeople is the worst. The laziest form of training is giving people a script and then training them off of the script. Also, and it's kind of along the same lines, being like, we have a top rep, or if you're an early company and you've got a founder who's the lead salesperson, how do we make everyone like X? How do we make everyone sell like Y? And not only is that patronizing and diminishing for every person on your team who now feels like, well, I can't sell like X or Y. I'm not X or Y, especially when you apply a diversity lens on top of that. But scripting people is say this thing. It's not, what is the end in mind for this conversation? What are you trying to get out of that? How should both people feel, right? Training on the end of mind in a conversation and what you need to achieve in that call versus scripting the call. When you script somebody, you take every element of meaning out of it, and instead it's memorize the script and you sort of remove the brain. Think about how before we had GPS, or before we had cell phones that stored numbers, like you knew everyone's number. I knew as a kid where everybody lived. Whereas now, a GPS acts kind of like a sales script where I am no longer ingraining it because I'm just going to read the script and it's not making its way here. I'll give you an example. My older sister has lived in her house for 10 years. I have driven there multiple times a week for years. If I did not have my GPS, I don't know that I could get there. Like literally, that's the like I've driven, and it's like because when it's on, I'm not thinking about it and I'm just following this, right? You remove that, and now all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, well, okay, directionally, I think I get on 88 and I think I exit at road, but after, do I go left? Like it's just not getting in there. So scripting your salespeople or telling them to be like somebody else who is very good is bad. Derive the skills that lead to success, enable the skills, and understand the context of a conversation. Don't script people.
I think it's really powerful. I think of like scripts versus frameworks, if you will.
Yes.
You know, scripts is like you memorize, you say this exact verbatim thing, right? And how you deliver it is obviously very, very different. But then there's frameworks when you understand the context of it. So you're able to jump around because that's just, humans aren't not designed to have scripts, you know? But I think about like great movies, it's the same thing. You know, the best actor and actresses, yes, they have a script, but they understand it so well, they can just flow through it and make it their own. And the essence is even better because of how they interpret it, right?
Yeah.
And that's how salespeople need to be as well, which I think is absolutely vital. So
Totally.
Also in terms of the leadership perspective, what's maybe a popular take that you see on sales thought leadership that you completely disagree with as well?
Ooh. I mean, there's a lot of like takes with sales leadership that I do agree with. One of the things that I have a hard time with that sales leaders do is when you're sitting down in your one-on-one with your team and you're like, what do you want to talk about? It's this idea of sales leadership asking people what they think their deficiencies are and then coaching to them, right? Like what we wind up doing as sales leaders, and we care, is we accidentally, it'd be like going into a doctor's office and being like, I'm very, very sick. And the doctor's like, oh my God, what do you think you have? And you're like, well, I looked it up. It's absolutely a tumor. You're like, okay, right? And then it's like, well, I'll treat you for a tumor if that's what you think that you have. But also, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to ask every other patient that I have today what they think that they have. And actually, based on the most popular answer, why don't I just treat you all like you have that? Let's do a training on the tumors, right? And so there's that element of like, and it's not necessarily sales leaders' fault, but we put the onus for so much coaching on the individuals instead of having a way to really objectively identify their needs and meet them where they are. And that's like the next level of sales leadership.
You know, it's so crazy, right? Because we see it all the time. We see these sales leaders. They think they're being a good leader. I say, hey, what do you got for me? What's on the list? But majority of people lack that self-awareness to understand their deficiencies. Like if they knew what was wrong with their deals and their process and their skills, they would have already fixed it. That's just the reality. So
Right.
Have you seen maybe a good solid framework to kind of follow as a sales leader to run effective one-on-ones?
You have to have a way to measure proficiency, hard skills and soft skills, and you have to have a plan for how to coach to it and prioritize it, right? So the first thing is, can you actually identify the proficiency of your team and that individual, right? The second is, not all gaps are created equal. You may identify a coaching opportunity for me, but if I don't actually have to perform against that gap for 2 weeks, not only am I continuing to erode revenue and have a lack of performance on every call that I am having between now and then, but by the time I get to the point where now it's time for me to put your coaching in play, I don't remember it anymore. So it's two things, right? It's like, how do I actually understand the proficiency of my team? And then how do I coach them based on prioritization? Why are we talking about this thing right now? And on these same lines, you actually, there's another pet peeve that is related to this that drives me nuts with SIP. And it's along the same line of asking people what they think their gaps are. But when you have someone on your team that comes to you and they're asking you for help, a lot of sales leaders are like, you know what I do? It's really smart. I say, what do you think you should do? And that's me enabling them to solve their own problems. They like pat themselves on the back and like shoot off a little streamer. And I'm like, Here's the thing. That's really weak and lazy leadership. When someone walks up to you asking for help, like, what do you think you should do? You're not giving your people the benefit of the doubt that they thought about something before they came to ask you a question. Now, sometimes you do have individuals that are very, very green and they have not thought for themselves yet. But that moment where they're asking you for help is a way to train that behavior or to identify that they've done something before they got there. So a simple fix is when someone's like, I need help with this, this, and this, instead of saying, what do you think you should do? Instead, it's, what have you tried so far? Right? Because if they're like, I haven't tried anything, then it's like, okay, let's talk about what we could try next time. And if they're like, I tried this, this, and this, now your coaching is so much more prescriptive. Right. The second layer then is, okay, do you need my help talking through it? Do you want me to solve it for you? How can I show up right now? Where are you needing my support, right? It's taking that step back and really letting people be seen and not going, what do you think you should do? And then when they say something, be like, great, try that. Like, terrible leadership, don't do it.
You know, you're so spot on where the important piece is that context, right? Because obviously a new hire is very different than someone who's been in the company for 2 years or someone's very, very senior, right? And you might train on past things already, right? So like how you go through and diagnose and coach them is going to shift drastically versus having that robotic, like, what do you think you should do? Which is like, it's like this generic advice, you know, like
ABC, always be closing. I had a sales manager tell me that one time early on where I was like, I'm having a really hard time getting this deal in. And I was like, and I'm worried about my pipeline. He's like, well, just do your ABCs. And I said, what? And he's like, just do your ABCs, always be closing. If you get more deals, then when you lose a deal, it's not as bad. And I was like, that was wild that you just said that again. I was like, that is wild advice.
I mean, it's
whoa, is that what I should do? More,
you need to get more pipeline and then be closing them. That's it.
Always be close. He literally, and I thought he was like, I gave him a minute to be like, and the punchline hits, and he was just looking at me, and I was like, yeah, okay, well, very effective. Thank you for that.
Now, I think what's really interesting is I found, generally speaking, like in a lot of organizations, let's say it's a bigger organization, they'll usually promote like AEs, that sales leader. It's kind of a common thing to do, right? And that can be good and bad depending on how they're kind of set up for success. How have you seen it to be effective to make that transition from you're the sales vice president, you promote a rep into that role? How do you prepare them for that next step? Because that is drastically different role and responsibility and skills that they have to be good at.
Well, you just said it. This is my beat the table. Like, it comes down to measured skills. As an organization, have you identified the critical skills that each leader and each role should have? And do you have a way to measure those? And same thing for all of the revenue producing employees. So first and foremost is who has a desire for leadership, right? Because your best rep or the best person for it, that may not be their journey. Some people don't want to do that. So first is, where does the desire live? And are we giving people opportunities to express that this is an opportunity that they want to explore in their career? And then second is, we look at the skills that you have in your current role and your proficiency in those skills, right? And then we measure you against some of the skills that you're going to need in leadership, and we identify those gaps, hard skills and soft skills. Where are you deficient when it comes time to be a leader? And between now and that promotion, how do we as an organization now help to up-level you and track that along the way? It all comes down to, if you cannot measure skills and if you do not have a denominator of what good looks like, you are guessing. And like a stopped clock is right twice a day. Every now and then you might nail it where you're like, I don't know, promote him. He wants it. And he winds up being an amazing manager, right? Like, that was my case. And not saying that like I was an amazing manager, but I wanted to be a leader. And they were like, you. And I was like, great. Like, but that, it doesn't always happen, right? Like, it's actually more that happens where people get promoted and they hate it and they fail and they feel terrible and they're unsupported. And the number of people who could have been an incredible leader, especially people that I've exec coached who were like, I'm terrible at this job. I hate it. I wanted to be a manager for years and I'm here and I hate it. And I'm like, let's take a step back and like drill this down to objectively what can we see around why you hate it? Because I guarantee if the will was there, it comes down to skill. And then environment also has something to do with it, which is sort of a separate point.
I think it's so powerful, right? Because once you identify what your team wants to, each person wants to do, it's like having really clear paths for that skill development to help them master those skills. And it's being really clear, what skills are they? What are they proficient? What are they deficient at? What are the KPIs to measure it? And how can we align to drive towards that? And I think it's super valuable that it's doing it before they're ready for those roles. So if you can identify the high potential people and you start preparing them early on, it's not such a slap in the face once they're in that role and they're trying to learn how to do everything day one, which is kind of crazy. So
That's right.
this is a super fun conversation. You dropped so much value today for across the board, right? Whether you're a frontline leader, you're running large orgs, where can people find you, learn more about Luster?
Yeah, if you want to find me, go to LinkedIn, Christina Brady. You can check out Luster, luster.ai. We also have a LinkedIn page. Yeah, a lot of what I've talked about today, this idea of diagnosing skills, predicting where they're going to erode revenue, prescribing the solution, like that's what we're all about. And it comes from the pain that I just talked about with all of you and wanting to solve it.
I absolutely love it. Thank you so much for being on.
Thanks.
That's a wrap on this episode of the Revenue Vault. If you got value, here's your next step. Go to venlyconsulting.com/teams and get a free performance scan of your sales org. We'll show you exactly where deals are stalled and how to fix it. And if this episode gave you even one insight worth sharing, send it to a sales leader you respect. I'm Marcus Shan. Thanks for being in the room.